Welcome to A Better Divorce podcast, where we have conversations about the emotional, financial, and legal issues that are on your mind or should be on your radar if your goal is to keep your divorce out of court. I'm collaborative divorce attorney and mediator Andrea Vacca, and I know that how you divorce matters to your long-term well-being. That's why it's my mission to help you have a better divorce with as little acrimony as possible, so that you can create the best life possible on the other side of your marriage. Hello, I'm your host, Andrea Vacca, and I'm excited to welcome attorney and mediator Diana Adams to the show today.
It's wonderful to be here, Andrea. Thank you.
Yeah, great to have you here, Diana. Diana is the owner of Diana Adams Law Mediation, which provides, like our firm does, divorce and family transition services through mediation and collaborative practice, as well as conscious uncoupling. Their firm serves all families and has special skills, however, serving LGBTQIA clients, their platonic partners, polyamorous clients, and non-nuclear modern families. She's also the executive of a nonprofit organization that provides family building services to low-income LGBTQI clients and families, and advocates for a more inclusive definition of family, which was the topic of their 2022 TED Talk, Why U.S. Laws Must Expand Beyond the Nuclear Family, which currently has nearly 2 million views. So congratulations on that, Diana.
So much. Thank you.
Welcome to the podcast. As I mentioned, we both own family law firms, and we're both in New York City and helping clients divorce outside of court, both using collaborative divorce mediation on negotiation. Why, though, have you chosen that path for your firm and with your work with the clients that you're working with?
I found that I find it so much more satisfying, having been a divorce litigator, to be able to help people resolve conflict in a way that feels as honoring to their relationship, and especially if they have children, to their co-parenting and to the child. Because being part of divorce litigation can really be an additional trauma that's being added unnecessarily, and certainly is not going to help anybody to be better at parenting together, and can add a whole other layer of pain when that is not necessarily a necessity. And I find it really satisfying to help people recenter back to their appreciation for one another, the gratitude for the path they've had together, mutual recognition that it's best for everyone if their paths change, but being really honoring of that path that they've had. And I've really felt like, it's the stress and the pain of being around people in divorce litigation just feels so overwhelming to me as an empath, and it just felt so difficult to do. And I just find it so much more fulfilling for me and for my clients to be able to get to that place of resolution, even in really high conflict situations.
I absolutely agree. It's that's why we say how you divorce matters, because it's hard enough to divorce. It's emotionally painful, financially, it's frightening. All these emotions are coming up, and then to make it a war and fight against each other instead of trying to figure this out, it's so much more long-term success for the family is just so much greater if you can keep it out of court. So let's talk about divorce and same-sex couples. I find in particular, and I know you do too, but let's talk about it, like why couples who are divorcing should stay out of court, and why same-sex couples in particular want to stay out of court. So what are you seeing as the main reasons for that?
Well, I think that, as we know as divorce professionals, oftentimes the rubric for dividing marital property, for instance, in an equitable way, can be a blunt instrument through New York State law and the courts. And whenever possible, I think that it's going to feel more satisfying to decide for yourself how you want to divide property, just as it's more satisfying to, decide how you want your visitation and child custody schedule to be worked out, rather than a judge saying, transfer at McDonald's on Saturday at noon because I don't want to have this conversation anymore, which is, so working it out yourself is always going to feel, I think, usually better if you can. But then especially for same-sex couples, because that valuation of marital property starting at the date that you get married often unless a couple is very new, it is often not going to necessarily feel as equitable, because I've been in many situations in which a couple has been together for many years, and then they got a domestic partnership, and then they got a civil union, and then they got married. Somewhere along there, they bought a house together. How do we value the house? And as we would expect, the person who with more assets, or the person who put more money into the house, might say, "Oh, well, we weren't legally married yet, so I don't actually have to be splitting this with you." And then the other person says, "Well, I didn't have much, but I put in what I did have, and we were thinking about this as our house, and I wasn't planning for my future in the same way." So I think that it introduces these areas that are best handled with a lot of nuance and care. And of course, in that kind of situation, that's going to bring up a lot of emotion. People are going to put the back up a little bit of like, are you trying to abandon me and not share with me? And I am hurt, and I'm horrified by that. And maybe there's already some tension of getting divorced. And so that's the kind of thing that can really inflame a war. And you could spend your child's inheritance and college fund on arguing in court for several years, which I've unfortunately seen. When should we start what is equitable in terms of marital property distribution? Was there a reliance on a contract that we really had been splitting assets before the date of the marriage? And rather than go through all of that and spend down the assets that you're trying to divide up and go through that trauma and that pain and that hurt, I think that it's been so much more satisfying in that situation, maybe with collaborative lawyers in the room to talk people through and help each of them speak their perspective about where they're coming from. And I find that to be just really satisfying, as I said, when you're in this high conflict situation. And I could just see from experience, these people could be in court for 2 years and spend all the money they're fighting about on this. Or we could, have a few months of hard meetings and really find a way through. And we usually do. And that's what's so satisfying about doing collaborative practice in divorce, I think.
I agree with that. I mean, you could just come up, if you can get people in a room talking to each other instead of just their attorneys fighting and sending
Right.
letters back and forth and talking about the law and talking, my client thought this, my client thought that. Let them talk to each other in the collaborative divorce or in mediation. Everyone's in the same room, even if it's a Zoom room, they're looking at each other. They're
Right.
talking, they're being facilitated to have a conversation that really looks at their family, their expectations, their understanding. And when I can hear your client saying something very different than my client's experience, it helps, right?
It really
It's not just a one-sided argument. You have to hear both sides. So it's helpful for the attorneys as well to start thinking and helping to craft more creative solutions for these non-traditional situations that the law, like you said, we'll just take the scalpel and cut it in half. And that's not what's going to work for these families. So
Absolutely. I agree. And as you said, it's also, I think, healthy too for the lawyers in general to get out of the mindset that I think, unfortunately, sometimes lawyers in family conflict or divorce are, they're thinking about this as almost like a chess game. Like, I want to get as many pieces on my side as possible. And I see this when I'm reviewing prenups sometimes, where it's like these aggressive terms of people that are getting married. And it's like, let's remember, these are whole people, and they may want to, maybe there are some other values in addition to just getting as much money, as much, property, as much time with the kid, as opposed to winning things over the other person. I think it also helps all of us to shift into a perspective of how can we support this whole family system, and how can we, improve the overall well-being of everyone. And that, rather than thinking about this as, I want to get as much for my client as possible, this is not a game. And these are whole people. And that brings in the counselor at law aspect of it that I think can be really helpful, and to really talk to your client about what their priorities are. And so if you're seeing, okay, maybe we bought the house before the date of the marriage and your spouse misunderstood. Is it going to feel better to you also as to the client? What's going to feel better to you to move forward with peace? Because being able to put the wrench in and kind of feel like you're swindling your former partner and not being generous, and have that narrative even in the other person's head and in your children's head or other people's heads, is that going to feel better than just giving them some extra money, right? I'm kind of a Buddhist hippie for a divorce lawyer. And so I'm like, really? What's the overall priority here? And if you have the means and the person needs financial security, let's think about how we can help the person feel secure. And with creativity, I love the creativity of this, that if you were in court, it might be, well, we're doing a forced sale on the house and we're dividing the proceeds in half, right? And that's maybe not what anybody wants, to sell the family home. And so instead it could be, okay, if this person's feeling like they want financial security, maybe that financial security could come in a different way. And I've had it be the other spouse has more professional connections and they are going to help them get their next big job, and put the effort in, and pay for a career coach, pay for a financial advisor. Maybe they're going to pay for them to go back to school. But to have the other person feel like you care about me and you're on my team, and you're going to make sure that I'm not going to be left financially insecure, maybe what the real priority is. And it doesn't have to be that you necessarily do a forced sale on a house.
I've seen that come up, and that idea of help me reestablish myself. And because these relationships may have started 10 years or 20 years before the actual marriage date. It's a long-term relationship. Maybe one person has been out of the workforce, they've been taking care of the children, or they just became the primary caretaker of the home or homes, and now they need to do something else. Well, maintenance, spousal support we only look at the duration of the legal marriage. So that's another issue, that you want to keep this out of court if you can, so that we can look at the whole relationship, the whole duration, and consider what is needed to help this person relaunch. And that's where some equitable creativity, as we said, can come in.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point in terms of that, maintenance and whether this person really needs that. And sometimes it's not necessarily about incomes, but really somebody maybe not having managed any of the finances or any of those kinds of logistics of their life, and I remember a client with a gendered dynamic that can happen too in a same-sex couple.
Sure.
And so there was a man who, he had a graduate degree and he was making $100,000 a year, and he was 35 years old. But for the past 15 years, he had never paid a bill. He never managed the finances. He didn't know anything about their long-term finances, and he felt really financially disempowered. And they had entered into a gendered dynamic in which he hadn't even realized it, but where he didn't feel like he knew how to take care of himself in some ways. And so being able to talk about that is challenging. This kind of thing happens in lots of different kinds of relationships, but I feel like sometimes in same-sex couples, progressive people don't feel it sneak up on them the same way that as a woman, you might think, wait a minute, I have no idea about our finances and I've never even seen our taxes before. You might think, maybe your friends are going to say, you probably should look into that, right? But I've seen that creep up with same-sex couples and not really realize that, and have somebody just feel like, I really have no idea what the money is, where the money is, what's going on, and I need some kind of support. And so even if it's, whether it's thinking about maintenance, as you said, based on this person needs some support to relaunch, or is it, we're going to support you and support you maybe through your embarrassment about that, to we're going to hire you a financial advisor for a year. We're going to make sure that you feel like you're going to be taken care of and feel empowered about those kinds of decisions.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I know you mentioned the embarrassment, and I think there is some shame that comes in because it's not expected. It's like, you think men know about money and women don't, that's a traditional
right
idea. But this gendered roles that come on in all relationships. I've had women in heterosexual marriages. This one client in particular always comes to mind when she said, I can't believe I became a 50s housewife. I had a graduate degree, but my husband made more money, so I stayed home with the children. Well, this happens in all relationships. You can become a 50s housewife, even if you're a wife.
Can. And it's something, that we can all be aware of. And, we all have blind spots with that. And I'm a feminist activist. And at the same time, I get rusty at how to change the oil in the car because I don't want to, you know what I mean? And my husband will do it. Right. And so these kinds of things can creep up where it's like, hey, I don't want to have to figure out the utility bills and the taxes. Great. But being mindful that those dynamics can creep up, and being able to relate to clients and try to help them not feel shame about that, and and really work through being able to acknowledge it and have maybe everybody on the professional team be able to give them empathy for that.
That's really important too.
Encouragement and empowerment. And, with those kinds of clients, I'm often saying, you are a lot better at this than you give yourself credit for, and being that kind of low key cheerleader, I think is also sometimes important.
Mhm. Showing them how they can get even better at it and how they can get,
Yeah.
using in the collaborative process, we have the financial professional on the team can help sit down with one party and give them the education that they need, perhaps around finances. The other one might not need it, and one will. So that's the other benefit of collaborative, of course. Another area I'd like to touch on are what we're seeing more of clients getting married when they already have open relationships, and then sometimes they didn't have open marriages or polyamorous marriages. They weren't going into the marriage thinking this, but it was consensual during the marriage to open up the marriage in some way, and then those marriages might end. They divorce, and it's touchy. It's a little more complicated. We have found that we're using the collaborative process for these couples is wonderful because of all those complicated emotions that are being dealt with. So I'd just like to understand, I'm sure you've worked with more of these couples than we have, but what has been your experience and any advice that you have?
Mhm. I think that it's so helpful for clients who have been exploring consensual non-monogamy, which, by the way, is 20% of US adults have been in a consensually non-monogamous relationship, which is as many people as have cats. So it is fairly normative at this point that many people are exploring that. And I think even more in a place like New York City. And so one thing is it's really wonderful to have professionals who can help people feel unashamed to talk about that as well, because I think that's one of the goals here with picking professionals to work with that you can feel comfortable, whether it's talking about, hey, I got into a money dynamic that I feel a little sheepish about, or yes, we had an open relationship, or I made some mistakes. Having a collaborative lawyer that you feel like you can really talk to, and a whole team that feels like, okay, I can really be honest with these people, I think is something that's really wonderful and can feel a little different and more nurturing than some lawyer dynamics with clients. And so I think having that openness, because otherwise I've seen sometimes dynamics of one person was more interested in the open relationship than the other. And so there can be some shaming that happens where it's like, well, I wanted monogamy, but he had just kind of never really grown up. So, the little microaggressions about it, and being able to kind of spot those and talk about it. And then realize that there are all of these other nuances and complexities that can happen when you have an open relationship. It is one thing to say we're going to have an open relationship, but for these kinds of relationships to work, there's a lot of talking and a lot of negotiating. And sometimes you don't know how you're going to feel. And I call it finding your boundaries by tripping over them and being like, wow, that was too much, you know?
Right.
Right. And so sometimes it's like, oh, we're going to an event and we're going to see the other person I'm dating. How do you feel about that? And it's like, I don't know. Let's see. And then it's like, I feel terrible, it turns out. So being sensitive to the ways that people might have signed on for something and still felt violated. That's a dynamic that comes up a lot. Or
Yes.
I didn't expect you to fall in love.
Or we agreed we would only date people that were married, and then he started dating someone who's not married, and she's still following that rule and he's not, and
Right.
so
And maybe there could be feelings of betrayal for that third person as well, for example. Two, if it's, hey, wife tells the husband, I don't want you to see this person as much anymore, or only with me there, or, no, because they're not married. And then the husband doesn't convey that to the third person. And so it's like, wait a minute, you're having me participating in a cheating dynamic that I didn't agree to. So I think that third shadow person, sometimes having their input can actually be a helpful to hear their perspective too. And so that's something we've done, is like actually have a meeting with that person to talk about it if they're up for it, or a call to be able to report back what they had to say about it, or, just some sort of a feeling of healing and feeling like that person deserves care as well. And, because there are all of these nuances. Can you fall in love? Can you, we said we'd have an open relationship, but I did not realize that you'd be spending so much money on this. That's another huge one that comes up, is spending money on other partners. And how do you manage the spending money on dates? And I think what comes down to often a core of what are our base agreements about how much you're dedicating to our core relationship, and what are my needs around that, and trying to help people get as clear about that as possible in advance. I really love doing family formation agreements, and help people with that, with polyamory or finances, but with prenups, as well as with these more interpersonal issues, because I think it's really helpful to help people negotiate in advance what it is they want to create. And because these are the thorny issues that do tend to sometimes come up. And, I think sometimes people feel like if they're signing on for polyamory, that they're not allowed to have any boundaries. And so they'll say, well, my husband was out 5 nights a week and was also sleeping with my friends. And it's like, whoa, no, just because you have an open relationship does not mean that you're not allowed to have any boundaries. And if your husband was spending 5 nights a week golfing, that could be a problem, right? It doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're not spending that time, or if he was spending half the budget on golfing, that would be a problem. So being able to still say, whatever it is you want to do to maintain your independence and your personal life, great. But what are our core agreements about how much of our resources of time and money and energy are going outward?
Yeah. I with regard to, talking about the boundaries up front, thinking things through, how will this work? I've helped couples with that, with prenuptial agreements, especially around the finances. But I'm also thinking, I haven't done this, but maybe you have, with postnuptial agreements. When you've agreed to open your marriage, that might be time for the postnuptial agreement, and have this conversation at that time to talk about the boundaries and finances. Have you helped couples with postnups as they enter into this new phase of their relationship?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that it's wonderful that in New York, you're allowed to do postnups that are just as valid as a prenup. And so I think that is, and it varies state by state, but that's wonderful, I think, to be able to alter some of the terms as you go along if what's happening isn't working for you. And so I think can be really empowering for couples to feel like, okay, we started out in one dynamic and now we want to get more clarity. My collaborator and friend and mentor Esther Perel often talks as a therapist about how if you have a fracture in your relationship, you can have a different phase. So it's like we've had, she'll say, my husband and I have been together for 20 years, but we've had 3 marriages in there. Right. And so what's the new era that we're creating? And sometimes there's an opportunity, like a phoenix rising, if you've had some sort of a fracture, to figure out, okay, what do we want to do differently? Or we feel like there could be the potential for a fracture. So let's get clear, for example, about how we're managing money if we have new information. And that new information could be that one of you is disabled or is caring for a disabled child and is out of the workforce. The new information could be that you have other partners and you want to be clear about sharing finances with them or not.
It'll just make the marriage, that new stage, go more smoothly. There's an understanding, less insecurity, and perhaps save the marriage and not allow it to fracture because of, problems that can arise later. So highly recommend the postnup if you're considering this.
Agreed. May I add something else on that point? I think that
Sure.
as there's this idea of, okay, we could have multiple marriages within one couple, I think that there's also the potential with this kind of idea of conscious uncoupling to be able to also think about what is it that we want to continue? What are the aspects of our relationship that are not working? And what is working? And maybe we still want to feel like family together, especially if you have some other shared connection, like having children together. You may be in a situation of continuing to work together as family. So maybe working on some of your communication together will still be helpful because there still is some kind of close relationship. Or even without children, you just might feel like this person is a core family person to me. And maybe we don't want to live together. We don't want to share our finances, but maybe we want to stay family. Maybe we still want to stay in the same social communities. Maybe we want to keep owning a business together. And that part is working. And so being able to help people think about this person could still be my family, and what is the next era of that for us?
Transitioning the relationship from married to unmarried, and how do you want to, what is the relationship going to be? Love that. And I wanted to talk to you about conscious uncoupling. So thank you for opening that up. Many people have heard about unconscious uncoupling through Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin's, but there's a book, I believe, that was written by the therapist that helped them. And you offer your clients you open that up to them, that they can, you call it positive divorce rituals to consciously uncouple. So I'd love to hear more about that. Like what kind of positive divorce rituals you've helped clients create, and that you've brought up to them as options for them.
Catherine Woodward Thomas is the therapist who wrote about conscious uncoupling and has consciousuncoupling.com. I really recommend looking into it, and has a lot of really lovely open source resources that give examples of possible rituals that other people have used. And so, for example, what I might do is, I welcome clients into the realm of options. And maybe they would like to add to do an actual ritual of conscious uncoupling. Maybe they'd like me to give them some ideas of things they could do on their own. Maybe they'd like me to actually help facilitate it. Maybe they're going to say, that's pretty woo-woo for me. No, we don't really want that. Fine. But we might still agree on some intentions at the beginning of the process. And I think that intention could still keep some of that spirit of what is it that we want to keep, and what is it that we are letting go of. And we're going to honor that part and make a new agreement about what is it that we want to continue with, and feeling not just like, conscious uncoupling is not just the ritual, but it's also a mentality around not just this is a severing, this is violent, this is a failure, but rather we appreciate the journey that we've been on together. And so sometimes the rituals might be, I honor you, and giving like you do with vows, kind of a closing ceremony of, I honor you for the path you've walked with me. I honor you thank you for teaching me this and this and this. And each take turns doing that. And maybe there's a ceremony of, you honor and you thank, and then you sometimes say, I release you. I release you from the vows that you made, and each say that, and say, I release myself, and go back and forth and say, like, I release myself from the parts of this that weren't working. Sometimes there's like we take the rings off and we put the rings together in a little basket, and maybe they go into the river. Maybe they're going to get sold later, whatever, but we're going to take the rings off and, have a ritual of that, think about what would feel meaningful. And being able to sort of, if there's a romantic object, being able to like honor, whether it's the rings or the hand fasting wreath or, the candle from the wedding, something like that. Like we want to, put this down together. And then a welcoming, of maybe it's, I welcome you as the father of my child. I honor you as the father of my child. I welcome you as my family for life. It can be really beautiful. And so sometimes it's saying, hey, there's lovely free scripts at consciousuncoupling.com. If you want to just go do this yourselves and don't want me to be there, if you would like me to be there and facilitate something, I'd be honored to. I've also seen situations of a new partner being involved. And as we're involving a new partner, we're honoring the previous partner. And so that could also feel somewhat healing if it's rather than the sort of feeling of like the other woman or the other person is coming in and is intruding, for that new person to also be present and to say, I honor your relationship and your connection. And I will always honor you as his family for life, as her, as the mother of his children, as the, person who journeyed with her through this. And so I think that can also be something that can be powerful to think about. If there are other core people, maybe your maid of honor is there, maybe the new boyfriend is there, who can witness you if you want that, or maybe it's a sacred private ritual. There are also people for whom their spouse isn't going to do that. And this can also be something that is internal, that you do for yourself. And maybe they're not going to be, maybe the problem is that they don't care for you the way that you want about your emotions. And this is a person who never would have done this kind of thing for you that you wanted. And you get to do that with me if you want. You can do that with your best friend if you want. You can do that alone if you want. And you can make your own rituals for feeling a sense of transition that's positive.
I was going to ask you if you could do that on your own. So I'm glad you said that, because I would think sometimes you're not on the same page about one
Right.
might feel it's very like, I need to just be done with this. I don't want to do it. The other one wants to be more, really more contemplative about it and think more about what the relationship was, the strains, what they got, what they're releasing. It's a beautiful idea. And I haven't gone to that website, so I will do that. I think it's a wonderful thing to see if clients might be interested in doing something like that with me or without. Uh, you know, I also, I think, especially if you have children and this new partner, bring in a third person when you mention that. If this person is now going to be like the step parent to your children and living with them half the time, it's something. How beautiful that must be to be able to bring them in and say, I thank you for that you are now partnered with my soon to be ex, whatever, and you are now going to be parenting, helping to raise our child together. And I honor that and I thank you and vice versa. So I can especially see how that could be very helpful.
That can be really helpful to soothe some of those tensions,
Yeah.
because that can be an even more fraught bond of, the new partner step parent that you didn't necessarily sign on for in the beginning, but having those three people perhaps make some agreements with each other. I agree to never undermine your authority as their father, as their mother. I agree to always, honor you. And then also for the bio parent, maybe saying, I welcome you as another parental figure to my child with vulnerability and with trust. And, you know, I will also honor and nurture that relationship and won't undermine it. And that can feel really powerful. Maybe it's a ritual, maybe it's a meeting in which I try to kind of nudge those words out of people of appreciation, of feeling safety, because I think there can be a tremendous feeling of insecurity in that dynamic that benefits everyone, and the children especially, from having a feeling of groundedness in all their parental figures. Because actually the majority of US kids, and even more in New York, do not live in a nuclear family with parents in their first marriage. So all of these issues really are not just about taking care of the adults, but taking care of the majority of children who live in households that look a little bit different. Maybe they live with single mom and grandma. Maybe they live with often separated parents, and new parental figures. And so I think it benefits all of us to think about that and to get other tools for how we could honor each other, solidify those relationships, and prevent tension and drama.
Yes, the children are part of all of this, and I didn't realize how many the majority of children are living in non-traditional families. It's
Exactly.
now let's
Yeah.
just say what's traditional. I know that's all about your talk and you know, just
Right.
honor.
I often say actually that I encourage us to say non-nuclear, because these kinds of extended family networks actually were more traditional. And the nuclear family is really a creation, an experiment of the past 100 years, and hasn't necessarily worked out well for women or for children, right? So it's kind of a capitalist tool of like, this would work well. Um, and that's a whole other side topic I could get into. But I think it's useful for us to kind of have an openness toward these other kinds of family configurations as also just as valid, and think with some creativity. And I think it's useful for all professionals to be aware of that, because I think we're now at this cultural moment where we're going to be seeing more and more of that.
We're seeing these families form. We're seeing them end. We're seeing them transition. So whether you're on the financial side or the legal side or the medical side, this is who we're dealing with. This is who needs our help, and we need to respect where they are, where they're going, and help them live their best life, them and their children. So I thank you so much for coming on today. And as you know, I ask every guest, what is your one better divorce tip? So what would you have to say to that, Diana?
I think my better divorce tip is to really try to put yourself in your former spouse's shoes, and with empathy, and take a moment to pull aside the resentment and the hurt, and to really feel into where their fear is, where their worry is, where they might be coming from, and remember the person who had a great heart, whom you fell in love with, and try to view their actions now, um, with a lens of compassion and empathy. And I think that ends up feeling the most personally satisfying, as well as helping to ease the process so that it isn't a trauma, because then that helps us show up as our best selves.
Wonderful tip. Thank you. Love that. Okay, so how can someone find you if they're interested in working with you or learning more about you or your firm?
I'm at dianaadamslaw.net. And I also have a nonprofit, chosenfamilylawcenter.org, in which we do not do divorce, but we do a lot of LGBTQ family formation and legal advocacy for modern and non-nuclear families.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, for all of you listening, watching, if you know someone who's contemplating divorce or want to know what options are available to have the least adversarial divorce possible, you can contact Diana. You can also download our free ebook, Divorce Without Court, A More Peaceful Solution, and where we talk about mediation and collaborative divorce. You can click the link in the show notes and we'll get that right out to you. And if you like today's show or today's episode, please like and subscribe. It'll help others find us and have a better divorce. So this has been another episode of A Better Divorce podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks so much for having me.
You've been tuning in to another episode of A Better Divorce podcast with Andrea Vacca. Thank you for subscribing, leaving your positive comments and reviews, and sharing the show with others. You can watch episodes at vaccalaw.com, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And you can listen through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Bye for now, and remember, you can have a better divorce.